GDP goes up with war. So if market size is a measure of civilizational progress, then war is awesome. GDP goes up with addiction, because if someone is addicted to McDonald's, addicted to their smartphone and purchasing, addicted to whatever, it leads to more market activity. It goes up with diseases that are treated through for-profit processes. There are kids who do very well at the primary metrics of school, like SATs, but who are suicidal or sociopathic. So from the narrow definition of did this way of raising kids and educating them do well, SAT, sure. From did we raise healthy human beings that can also contribute to a healthy society? It's a very different question. So there is progress of stored knowledge. There is progress of capability of achieving things. Are the goals well defined? Are they good goals is a really important question.
And so we have an opening with Daniel Schmachtenberger speaking briefly, a clip from a recent conversation with Nate Hagens about the self-terminating nature of our global economic system. And that leads us to our guest today as a part of the Islands of Sanity in a Mad World series in 2024 and 2025. Mr. Mark Skelding, it is such a pleasure to have you here with us in this fledgling, but soon to be months and months long series. With the focus on what we spent yesterday in a long conversation, which I very much enjoyed, exploring exactly the kind of things that Daniel Schmachtenberger was just talking about. And I will just do the most cursory introduction of you now, and I hope you'll follow it up by filling in some of the gaps. But I had the pleasure of meeting you. I guess it's been a couple of years now that we've been sharing calls almost on a weekly basis, and they're always about these core issues, one way or another, the inevitability of and the imminence of human-caused collapse of both Earth and human systems, and particularly from, as we would call it around here in my world, the inner work of collapse. Like, what is the psychology that got us here? What is the psychology that has us maintain at the level we are? And what do we call this level of maintenance? I'm asserting that we are living now in a mad world, and hence this series, and hence our conversations. And you, as a person who's been in the mental health field for quite a while, in I believe, quite a rich facet of the mental health provider world, one that has some depth to it, one that has some ability to create a broader context from when all that stuff was invented. We didn't have global existential issues to handle every single day, polycrises, meta-crises, permacrises, and so on. So here we are. You're joining me in one of the first few of what will be a very long and extraordinary chain of people answering the question, how do we determine, are we an insane global culture? And if so, what got us here? How do we define mental health in these times? How do we define mental illness in these times? And where I'm hoping we'll get to, I know it's a relatively short window to cover this broad, incredible topic, but I eventually would love to hear anything that you've been brewing on in terms of how could we come together to, in a grassroots fashion, redefine mental health, redefine mental illness in a way that is really co-generated by people, again, from all walks of life, very much a grassroots effort. And that's, again, what this particular series is about. So Mark, if you would just add in anything that you would like to say specifically about your career history, your interests that have gotten you into conversations like this for your lifetime. And then feel free to pick any of those prompting questions to begin with. Anything that Daniel may have said, anything that might be brewing for you in general. And just really a pleasure to have you here.
Why, thanks, Dean. It is great to be here. Yeah, I'm probably with probably the some of the other viewers, the that lovely unfolding of what we might talk about is now kind of moving in slow motion, like some kind of weird pinball machine. So you may have to remind me, but yeah, no, it's good. And you and I have had some tremendous conversations, and yeah, I'm for 25 years or more. I've been a psychosynthesis guide, psychotherapist, and psychosynthesis, a transpersonal approach that dates right back to the very beginning of modern psychology. Modern psychology, there's a phrase. The African psychologist Bayo Akomolafe refers to modern psychology as being the policeman of the system. And that might be a useful meme to pick up on at some point. My personal journey into it, well, I suppose it's transpersonal psychology. I grew up in a church household. My father was an Anglican minister in the UK, and my mother was deeply committed too. So I guess the spiritual world has been part of my world. Well, I've been part of the spiritual world since I was born. And I think when I was about 14, I rewrote the Apostles' Creed from a Buddhist perspective, which was a very interesting conversation with my father to have.
Oh,
Given that it begins, I believe in one God, which Buddhists don't say. But in terms of coming into this work, it would really be when I was privileged to be working in fundraising and marketing, believe it or not, but for the wildlife trusts in the UK. So we were raising money to buy land and to reintroduce species and so on and so on. This was in the very early 90s, in the lead up to the big Rio conference. And so we had a number of scientists on the team who were talking about the forthcoming Rio conference and the various impacts of climate change, the potential impacts down the line. And it became very clear to me, something I'd already been kind of aware of, but it became graphically and poignantly clear to me that what we were doing was at best putting band-aids on the situation, because in fact the land that we were buying, the species that we were introducing or reintroducing, they were just fine. The problem was human beings and our approach, and that what we were really doing was trying to save these things from us. So,
Mark, if I could, I would just like to interrupt for a moment. I have
yeah,
a
go for it.
curiosity creeping up, and that is uh, in that time, I think you said early 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're describing it's not Earth that has the problems, it's human beings that has the problems.
Yeah.
Would you have said, if somebody asked you, is our human system on this planet, is it insane? Is there a core disconnection from the sanity that is the web of life? And are we insane as a global culture? Would you have said yes then?
I would, probably I would have done, I guess. I would have probably said it's a crazy situation when we try. I would have said the situation was crazy.
Hmm.
The it's been, I think for most of us, it's a kind of slow dawning because, of course, we resist it. I mean, we are so embedded in the system, we're dependent upon the system. You know, you and I, we would not be having this conversation. People would not be party to it if it were not for all of that system.
Yes.
And you know, in what's his name, Jean-Paul Sartre, we have dirty hands, les mains sales. So we can't help. I mean, this is the wicked, evil beauty of the system is
Hmm.
to fight it, we have to be involved in it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if we step out of it, then that's absolutely fine because it makes no difference to the system. It doesn't care.
Yeah.
I would have used the term that you're talking about kind of insanity, probably after I discovered the work of Gregory Bateson, who talks about how our system has driven I think it was the Erie Canal, that we drove the Erie Canal mad. And he describes madness in that context as being forcing or impacting a system in such a way that it is no longer able to sustain life and sustain what it needs to support itself.
Yes. A harm
So,
to self or others.
well, yeah, it's
Yeah.
but there's no difference. There's no or in that.
Yeah.
There
I
is
get it.
there's no
I'm just using
separation.
the parlance of the policymakers, of the lawmakers, of the usual the psychology, um, the folks who put together the DSM and so on, finding a words that fit with the business as usual linearity. So
That's
I'm
right.
sorry to have interrupted you, and I hope that that was an okay piece to put in there. And if there was any part of the thread you were on that you would like to return to, I hope you will. Again, I apologize if that was disturbing.
Oh, well, no, I think it's good because it keeps it lively because, you know, I can just get into that kind of peanuts, Lucy and peanuts, mwah, 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 you know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I mean that is it. And so I went from working in wildlife conservation to psychology and psychotherapy
Mhm.
with the kind of half-assed notion that somehow working in psychotherapy was going to help somehow change things, um, which I think it can. But you know, psychotherapy, psychology, and going back to Bayo Akomolapi's quote, its roots are in that late Victorian period, the end of the 19th century,
Mhm.
which was, you know, rich in Darwinism, in colonization, colonial thinking, human exceptionalism, and the institutions of psychology remain embedded by and large in that worldview. And that was the worldview that a human being is exceptional, is separate, is distinct, is disconnected, is individual and discrete.
Yeah.
That is the worldview that underpins all the institutions that dominate our planet.
Right. So is it safe to say, just to jump back to one of the prompts, that now would you define our global human operating system as insane?
Yeah, well, but yes, in those terms, I would. Um, but it's a dualism,
Hmm.
and so I'm kind of reluctant to do that because if you talk about sane, you immediately set up insane, and that's helpful up to a point. Um, I prefer to look. I prefer to live in terms of the long story and the 14 billion years it's taken us to get here,
Hmm.
of which we are part of an ongoing process.
Mm-hmm.
And what we know about evolution is that it progresses through processes of kind of almost grinding to a halt, and then solving the problem of that, moving to a different level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're at such a pinch point now,
Mm-hmm.
where demonstrably the planetary system of which we are a part is giving us feedback on how we are conducting ourselves within it.
Right.
So to conduct ourselves against that which gives us life, in human terms, is insane.
Mm-hmm.
In evolutionary terms, it's a glitch or it's a learning moment. And we're in a position where we have to decide between sanity and insanity, or simply evolution and learning.
I'm sorry, or would you say the last part? Uh-huh.
So we as a species, we either get caught up in sanity and insanity,
Yes.
and who's right and who's wrong, or we step back and re-engage with evolution and learning, because evolution is learning. The system is constantly learning, and it progresses through a feedback process of which we're a part. And my stuff about psychosphere, the collective whole is the learning machine. The learning, no, I hate the word machine. It is the learning process, the living learning process. It's not a machine at all.
Yeah. So, um, I'm very much with you in avoiding the binary of insanity versus sanity, creating the binary of who's right or who's wrong, who's sane, who's not. That I find myself defining it far more like what you've just gotten through saying, that we have an evolutionary speed bump to get over. And it could cause billions of people to die or humanity to go extinct for all I know. But it is an evolutionary process and a moment in that process, and not about a binary of a superior or an inferior or a yes or a no or a us or them or like that. So I just wanted to make that clear. And um, there was, you're involved with a number of projects since I've gotten to know you over these past couple of years of very regular conversations. You're involved with some brilliant projects. You're hosting a conference, which is a very unusual and I believe rich way for people to gather together, in which there's an exploration, there's a collaborative exploration, and very much an experiential, fluid opportunity for people to truly just have a felt sense of what it is to reach into those unknown dimensions that are beyond that speed bump you and I keep mentioning. So that is one thing that you've got coming up here in the next month or so. And that's down in the Bay Area. And I'm happy to put a link in the show notes if there are people interested in connecting with you in that. You're also one of many mental health professionals and alternative mental health professionals that were gathered together to write essays in a edited book from Steffi Bednarek of the UK and the Climate Psychology Alliance over there and so on. And Steffi is a whole other story of someone who's got an extraordinary kind of a framing and of what is this polycrisis and how can mental health adapt and evolve and grow. So I know that you and Steffi are very close. You'll both be at that event that I was just describing. I'm wondering if you could share anything about that project and how it was to write a piece of that project, and um, perhaps you could share a little bit about what seems to be possible, what seems to be the growing edge for mental health to be relevant in these times. Uh, it seems like an extraordinary challenge. And there's so many brilliant writings, yours included in Steffi's book. Would you share with us anything you'd like to share about writing and that part of the process, or reading others' contributions, Steffi's contribution? There's, I think it's one of the most important psychological kind of gatherings in writing form that I've ever experienced at a time when it's absolutely necessary or needed. I'm wondering if you would share what your experience is of being a part of that.
Uh, or I think, I mean, what, it's a, I mean, Steffi's a friend of mine, and, it, you know, sometimes with our friends, we suddenly realize that what was always a pleasure is just an unbelievable privilege. And Steffi's very much in that, and what a brilliant woman. Um, and you know, one of the kind of subtitles of the book is uh, how to be when the familiar is dying, and um, that to me is the work of that's the soul work of our time,
Mhm.
is um, is being as articulate as we can be about that. But as you know, you have observed yourself many times, even the language that we use is challenged because the language is embedded in the familiar. So we're constantly trying to talk about something that's just over the edge. One of the guests at Hard Politics, which is the name of the gathering coming up, is Stuart Kaufman. He's a lifelong uh, researcher into all kinds of stuff. But he talks a lot about what he calls the available adjacent, which is a sort of quantum evolutionary process that evolution moves into the available adjacent, which is kind of like the next opportunity for what there is already, but it completely reorganizes everything that already is. So there's no way you can actually know it until it happens. His kind of slightly flippant story to exemplify that is about a kind of rather ugly squirrel 60 million years ago that gets frightened out of a tree by a hawk and just jumps for its life, and in so doing stretches out its skin and gets caught by the breeze, and from being a pariah squirrel becomes a much in-demand squirrel, and its genetic legacy becomes flying squirrels, which of course is a metaphor rather than biology. But the point being, until the squirrel leapt off the tree, the possibility of flight for squirrels was unknown. And we're in the position of having to jump off the tree. It's time to work out how to jump and what that means for us. And that's not something that we can really do on our own. And it's not something that we can really do in a small room with a psychotherapist, particularly a psychotherapist who is steeped in the idea of self, the idea of identity, that has still got both its feet firmly in 1883.
In the world that Daniel Schmachtenberger was describing for us in that opening clip.
Exactly. Well, I mean, you and I are part of uh, the semi-spontaneous and very informal happy hour at the Bates Motel, and the notion of the Bates Motel is exactly what Schmachtenberg is talking about, or yeah, in terms of the system that we live in makes absolutely perfect sense. It runs really well, provided you don't ask questions about it, and provided you don't ask at what cost is it, and that's not a financial cost. So the system that he is describing and that we live in exists in a perfect world that has no connection to the living world on which it depends.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Consequently, it is blindly reaching out and grabbing whatever it can from that living world with effectively no understanding of how that world works. The irony of it is that it's this opposable thumb that has given us this magnificent grasp on reality. And it's our opposable mind, our capacity to reflect on the effects of the opposable thumb, that we are resisting, because our identity, our ideas of success, and all that he was talking about is now wedded to the Bates Motel. And the only problem in the Hitchcock movie for the Janet Leigh character was that she asked one of the managers, Norman Bates, she pointed out to him that he was wasting his life and that there was more to life for him than that. Had she not done that, she would have happily got away with a shower and left in the morning, and there would have been no movie. And the system that we're in is massively resistant to anything or anyone that says, wait a minute, this is crap, isn't it, really? Unless that can be packaged up. And we see that, I think that's one of the dilemmas for anyone, including you, Dean, really, is in trying to get these messages out, we end up using the tools of the system.
Of course.
To use the tools of the system suddenly starts to be pulled into the language and the conversation of the system. And then you start wondering about costs and benefits. And, then you have a hierarchy of memberships. And the next minute, you've got a subscriber list of people who, if they're on this level of subscription, they get this level of act. In the next minute, you're a shopkeeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we all come along and enter into that process because that's what we've been doing since our parents said, oh, here, take a dime and go down to the store and get yourself a sweet, a lolly, what do you call it over here, candy.
Right. So I appreciate very much what you're saying. And I started to ask myself, so how do I intervene in my own internal process if I'm lucky enough that day to be somewhat aware of what you're describing? Because I do that. So I go through all the aspects you've just laid out.
Yeah.
It's as automatic as can be because that's what I've been saturated in, what we've all been saturated in since birth. Yet I believe, and I've actually experienced quite a bit of success with desaturating to some degree or another, give myself, at least a little breathing room above the level of the water to have some self-awareness, some awareness of our world. And, I'm drawn to some brilliant words, not so much, I think they were relayed really more than quoted directly from Vanessa Andreotti and her Hospicing Modernity book, just absolutely brilliant, where she's relaying the definition of colonialism is really not about the form of it, coming and bringing guns and poisoning, genocide, and on and on and on, the horrificness of it. But at its core is the pathology that we are separate from anything, from any other people, any other part of the web of life. That is the toxic core. And to have that kind of thread to such an essential element, like a foundation piece in this conversation, is that illusion of separation is apparently core to this entire conversation and what we're grappling with on a global level. And so that engaging with with practices of desaturation and of sense making to the best I can, have conversations the likes of which you and I have every week, to hold a small excuse me, a small bundle of really gold nuggets of these conversations, like that notion of separation being essential to what is self-terminating about this system. Excuse me. Those pieces help me to find my center, to come back to center if I've allowed myself to float off into some automatic loops that take me further and further from the core of what we're speaking about, and commodify every piece along the way. So I just wanted to mention that, especially for folks that might be new to this idea of what is sense making, and how can we find some core elements that we can all stand together holding some piece of, that can bring us together, help us to find a way to reconnect in some essential way after floating in the loops for a while. So,
well, it's extraordinarily powerful and empowering and exciting to think about ourselves as separate and being able to act on the world in the ways that we can.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. And I don't doubt that other species have some degree of that sensibility up to a point, but I doubt there are many that have the capacity, this is the human exceptionalism argument, have the capacity to do that to the extent that we can. The drug of that, it's a drug, a kind of drug. The drug of that is to become addicted to that one way of being and to think that nothing else matters. So if we, God forbid, got ourselves addicted to heroin or some other drug, that would become the commanding object of our lives, would be to make sure that we get our next fix. So everything then is contextualized by that way of being in the world. So everything about our way of being in the world is contextualized by the idea that we're separate and disconnected. And therefore we become our own ultimate authority, having turned our spirituality into some kind of men's club, and then slowly kind of raised that up in its hierarchical importance. until it had become a travesty that had to be put down, it's been replaced by nothing. So there is no, in the mainstream, there is no sense of anything greater than ourselves to
Yes.
which we are in any way answerable.
Yes.
So there's no ethical, moral backstop that isn't us and to do with our interests and is therefore constantly being politicized. Meanwhile, well, you know, if you and I were to hold our arms out, hold your arm out for a moment with me. This is an experiential exercise with Mark and Dean. Here we go. Try this at home, folks. It's okay. What are you noticing?
I'm noticing I'm a number of sensations in my arm that I was completely oblivious to just a moment ago.
Mm-hmm.
I can feel a couple of muscles in particular that are letting me know that they're working.
Mm-hmm. So they're using energy, right?
What, I'm sorry, what about?
You can feel yourself employing energy.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Where did that come from?
Where does the energy come from?
Mm-hmm.
All that biology, all that wonderfulness that has me be able to answer this question and breathe again.
And you know, if I could be annoyingly, you know, so, and where does that come from? And where does that come from? Eventually, we reach a point where you realize that this sensation in your arm is a direct link to something that happened just under 14 billion years ago, because no energy has been added in the system. This is it. This is you and me and 14 billion years of, it's quite remarkable. This is our direct connection to the beginning of this phase of the universe. You can put your arm down if you want, but it's a pretty important thing, so you might want. You know, we're never not connected. We just don't notice it. And there are so many things that we can do. Some of them silly. My own understanding is that we live in a system that is intelligent and that is exchanging information all the time about the whole. That a woodland is not merely a bunch of individual plants fighting with each other. It is that sometimes, but what it is being shaped by is the collective being of the whole ecology. We don't do that. Well, actually, we do. We're not separate from it. That's what's happening for us. We just don't pay attention to it. We fight it back constantly. So we're like the cancer cell, constantly fighting the information from the host.
Yeah.
And you know, our friend Shiva Woodbury, probably more than anyone, especially at that time, or 5 or 6 years ago, was very clear about how the dysregulation of the superordinate system of which we are a part shows up in all different parts of the system, all the different parts that compose the system. That's what systems are about. So how does the dysregulation of the big system show up in us? Well, it shows up in people are anxious, people are angry, people are distressed, people. That's not pathology. That's communication. Now,
It's awareness.
yeah, as with any system, the particular makeup of the part has a particular way in which it responds. So all of us are sensitized by our own kind of upbringing and the failures and rigors of our childhood. So in making sense of our experience, in the absence of a conversation about the superordinate system, which I would say is very much part of the job of psychology and the psychological institutions, in the absence of that, we can only make sense of it in terms of our own experience. or maybe our collective experience, or we talk about intergenerational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, our inbuilt process for being part of the big system and being part of the homeostatic processes that balance the planet is being turned into our personal pathology, and you really ought to go and see a therapist about it.
Mm-hmm.
That is a fallacy that can only exist if our only understanding of what it is to be a person, a self, is distinct and separate and disconnected. And that's what Andrea's talking about. Andreotti. Yeah. So our work is actually to challenge that, because psychology is, and philosophy, in a way, psychology is often a kind of applied philosophy. Those are the two fields that can directly challenge these notions of what it is to be a person and an identity. And, you know, Ian McGilchrist, who we've talked about a lot, has
Mm-hmm.
been fabulous in showing the hemispheres, the two hemispheres,
Mm-hmm.
and how they can work together. Because it's not about denying the capacity to be self-reflective and therefore to think as if we were not connected. That's clearly part of the evolutionary experiment about, is self-reflective consciousness a useful part of managing evolutionary complexity or not?
Mm-hmm.
The jury is still out on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'd like to just prod you a little bit, because you are so well positioned, given your life history, career history, and so on, to give us some pulse from your perspective. My sense is you have a fairly astute way of reading the global room, if you will, of what can we do. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about how I'm seeing it. We don't have enough mental health professionals now, and an accessible enough mental health world to take care of what's already showing up in cultures around the world and nations around the world. My prediction, and not that I know all that much, but it just seems super obvious, that we are on another exponential curve, which is the amount of need that there will be for mental health assistance for people who are troubled far beyond their capacity very soon, if not right now. So you're in that world. You have an incredibly broad and deep window or lens through which you are viewing what's going on. I think you have a strong sense of what are some of the teachable elements, what are some of the capacities that can actually be expanded for a regular person who does not necessarily connect with mental health professionals, and maybe doesn't have the money or doesn't see the need at their particular level, but they sure could use some like a menu of practices, a menu of capacities that can be expanded to be able to be more of service to and more present to the people that they love. Is this communicating? I know it's kind of a long question. Do you have any sense of things formulating at the level of mental health providers around the world, especially in the global north, because that's the audience mostly we're speaking to here? Are there ways that people can expand their capacity to be more and more present in the face of larger and larger stressors, which again is what I'm seeing happening now without a doubt. That is what is happening now and will be happening more.
Well, you know, I think that two things spring to mind immediately. Like anybody who's ever kind of worked with me in you know the psychotherapeutic kind of context, almost everyone will have heard me saying, look, psyche is not out to get you. Psyche is doing its best within a particular context to kind of make sense of things and to move information around. And so psyche is not out to get us. That's the first thing I think is really important. And the second thing is we just have to get away from these fucking experts. You know, like everything's getting everybody's a mental health expert because everybody's got mental health.
Mm-hmm.
What we have to do is start creating a conversation about well-being, and what does that mean? And it has to be inclusive rather than divisive, and that is the krypton of the system. Inclusivity is the last thing that wants you know, everywhere you look is this constant winnowing out and divisiveness. And I forget, there's some wonderful quote from, I think, probably the British Empire, some of my ancestors, no doubt, saying that the best thing you can do when when the natives get restless, the best thing you can do is work out how to get the groups within your opposition to be opposing each other. So long as they're fighting each other, they're not fighting you. And what do we see now with, you know, the whole, you know, QAnon, Greens, the whole system out there is fragmenting in such a way that these groups are now at odds with one another. But over the top, business just trucks along beautifully. In fact, the more of that fractiousness, the better, as Daniel Schmachtenberger was implying. You know, if we can have a few wars, it's a jolly good thing. You know, you know, gun sales, no doubt, are going to be going up as you guys in the States approach the election and people get more and more afraid. It's you know, it's terrifying.
Yeah,
it is terrifying. And so coming back to your question, rather than getting lost in the terror, is that we need to create islands of sanity in which opposing voices can find some kind of place. It's about, and that's again a role for the kind of, you know, psychologically trained professional, is to really use the skills to hold the space, to drop underneath it, to drop down, because we all have the same needs. We all have the same. In fact, anything that's alive has the same needs. So once we stop arguing about what we want, and wanting is a way that we get needs met, and start to talk about the needs, then all of a sudden we're in really common ground. You know, if you're talking about wants, well, is Ford better than General Motors? Oh God, really? Well, you know, what about Toyota? Really? That's crap. It's about what's the need underneath this, and what's the need that's being played and preyed on. As soon as you start talking about your needs, you drop out of an argument. No one can argue about needs because we've all got the same needs, and we start to see each other. So that's part of a psychological process. The other thing is about demystifying it. You know, we're in a development, I mean, it's unprecedented developmental moment because it's a species-wide developmental moment, but it's still a developmental shift.
Mhm.
And developmental psychology has got lots of really useful things to say about that. We've all had the experience of going from being kids to adolescence, God forbid, and then from adolescence into young adults, and so on and so on. We're actually quite good at developmental shifts. We need to remind each other of that.
Mm.
There's no way when you were 12 that you could really get your head around what it was going to be like to be 16 and a half. There's no way when you're 16 and a half that you can really have a clue about what it's going to be like to be 29.
Yeah.
But we all get there. And there's something that carries through that is the same, which we could talk about, that sense of being. So change is what happens around that space. So being afraid of change is somehow that we're going to somehow, or what we're sold in the fear of change, is that somehow this idea of knowing who we are is going to disappear.
Mm-hmm.
It's rubbish. This doesn't happen. We might feel very different about who we are,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not suddenly going to wake up one day going, you know, we're more likely to have the talking heads moment, which we were talking about the other day. This is not my beautiful house. There is more to me than this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm bigger than this. I can cope with this. So that's where the community, we need to be helping each other, because of course we all get worried when some of our particularly strong attachments are being shaken up. And that's when we need our community, not a therapist. Our community say, yeah, we're with you. We understand that. Come and sit down here. Let's have a cup of tea or a beer and have a chat about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
It's straightforward.
It seems like you're describing, I like to call it a neighborhood. Uh, you're describing a neighborhood of an ideal kind of community or neighborhood process that, again, an idealized, boy, if only it could happen in our neighborhood with our young people as they go through these different phases. And it, in some far more ritualized and I think far more deeply involved with it, with the creation of these moments, these transitions. It could be called initiation. Any of these moments, these stepping from one part of life into the next, has been called initiation. And I'm drawn to, out of what you're saying, what one of my mentors in particularly matters of grief and soul, Francis Weller, has written and spoken quite a bit about what he calls a rough initiation, one in which there is not that conscious safety net. There's not that elder who is conscious enough and engaged enough to be able to say, "Come on over here and have a seat. Let's have a cup of iced tea and let's talk about this. And I'd like to share with you what happened for me, and I'd like for you to share with me what you're feeling and what you're going through, and so on and so on." There's so many different ways in which it can show up in these times, and unfortunately, we have very, very few that are easy for me to point to. I'm just unaware of what pockets of initiation and of conscious initiation through elderhood and through a conscious engagement of the community in a number of different ways. But I appreciate the kind of idealized example you brought us. And that can happen just at the level of family, just at the level of that one uncle and that one nephew. That it can happen at some kind of scale. Whether it goes to larger scale, I have had my doubts for a long time, but I'm still very much holding it in my heart as a possibility at whatever scale is showing itself in the moment. So if it's that moment with that nephew, here we go.
Well, you see, I think an important thing in this process is the institution. The institutions are like the pillars upon which the Sistine Chapel roof of our culture is supported. And of course, the uncle and the nephew thing is important. And of course, what happens in the family is important. But the system doesn't give a shit about that.
Mm-hmm.
The system is only concerned that those pillars, the institutional pillars, are not tampered with. Because as long as those pillars are solid, they're going to hold up that ceiling, and anything else can happen underneath the ceiling. It doesn't actually matter, provided the ceiling is there.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some amazing work being done in communities, and or as we know, and all sorts of things are happening. Climate cafes are there trying to help people process their climate anxiety, but they're not saying that you're having this experience because you're part of the living whole, and by coming here and expressing it, you're actually turning up to a new sense of self, a new identity in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that needs to be articulated as well. Otherwise, you're just constantly going to be feeling a lot better and then heading back out into the world, doing your bit at holding the pillars up, and then feeling like crap again and coming back. Oh, yeah, it's great to be with you guys. But those pillars need to be dug up.
Mm-hmm.
They need to go. James Hillman, wonderful Jungian therapist, sort of 30, 40 years ago, died about 10 years back. But he talks about the need of terrorists of the soul. And when he's talking about terrorists of the soul, he's not talking about bombers. He's talking effectively, in a way, a far more insidious and dangerous threat to the system are those people who are going to come in and start saying, actually, this is patently wrong. This is not working. This is a misrepresentation. And even the very science that's arising from our psychological worldview is now showing the limitations of that worldview, which all the major sciences are saying that now, except for psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a massive, you were talking earlier about this need for a collective of voices. We'll have made great strides when the people who address the hydrosphere and the atmosphere and the biosphere are joined by the people who address the psychosphere, and that the psychosphere, which we currently dominate, is seen alongside the other spheres that serve the equilibrium of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Because until we do that, our psychology is causal and is driving a process. And if we aren't talking about the drivers of the process is never going to stop. We'll always be running around. It's like we're driving a train at high speed, and every so often we sprint ahead of it and try and do something. And then, oh my God, it's here again. Because what's that story? In fact, there's a Bayo Komalapi story that I just heard him saying that's about these monks. They reach the river, and gosh, there's someone in the river yelling, help, help, help. So one of them jumps in, pulls the people out of the river. They walk along. That was amazing. Then there's another one. Help, help. Jump in and get that one again. Happens 3 or 4 times. And then there's another one yelling, help, help, help. And the one monk says, you get them. And the other, and this monk turns around and sprints away up the river. I said, where the hell are you going? He says, well, I'm going to find out why they're falling in.
Mm-hmm.
So most of our modern psychology is trying to pull people out of the river, but we actually have a lot of tools which can also be applied to work to knowing why people are going in the river in the first place.
Yes. It's wonderful that you bring up that particular story. It is a permanent fixture in my introductory course called Collateral Beauty. For the people who are watching who are unfamiliar with Living Resilience, which is the little organization behind this podcast and this project. And our introductory course is again called Collateral Beauty. So you can come in at any level of membership into this little community and just jump right into this online course. And the first video that you'll encounter is something called the Stages of Awareness by a Canadian blogger named Paul Chafurka. Gives us a context of there's actually a continuum with which we can engage this multi-crisis, this poly-crisis, this predicament-laden world. And I start out that video with a 10-minute talk from a young activist at an earlier COP meeting 3 or 4 years ago. She tells that story as a part of how she's telling the story of her exhaustion and the other young activists' exhaustion of trying to grapple with the world to create change of some meaningful way, of meaningful kind in this world, when the adults of this world are all doing the pulling the screaming people out of the river, putting out fires is another, way to say it. And what she also, as beautifully as you've just said it, she also is pointing, saying we need to go upriver and find out why these people are falling in. That's what adults do. And these are my words, my interpretation of what she's saying,
Yeah.
and her deep despair of how the adults are so disappointing in her world, in her experience that she is sharing in this 10-minute talk, that they're not doing anything remotely like going to the source of what's going on, as adults should be doing. So I so appreciate it's beautiful how you just laid that out. It was a lovely additional, flavor that you brought to that. And
Well, I think one of the other things that I would talk to clients about is that you know our individual lives are always in relationship to the context in which we find ourselves, and even in that there is a kind of equilibrium and there's a relationship, and so life will knock on our door and kind of give us some pointers. And if we ignore that, then it gets a little louder.
mm-hmm.
And if we persist, it gets very loud indeed.
Mm-hmm.
And if we still don't pay attention, it'll kick the fucking door in.
Yeah.
And each of those is an initiatory moment. And you were talking about and of course, if we had those initiatory moments already, and they're kind of out there in bits because some of them have been commodified. They've already been, you can go and do the outward bound course, or you can go and do this course, or you can do the rite of passage course, and because that's what happens. But anyway, even if we haven't had those flavors, we're here now, and it's absolutely terrible to fall into kind of thinking, oh well, it's these young people are going to do the work. Well, they've got their work to do, but this is our initiation into elderhood.
Mm-hmm.
This is the time for working out, well, okay, I mean, initiations always build on what came before. So in any initiatory ceremony, there's the same patterns are there. It's a fractal process. So just because we didn't do our rite of passage when we were, 12 or 14 or whatever it was, now's the time. It's here now, and these are the conversations that we need to start having with one another about what if we were to think about this as some kind let's not get into the argument about damning the oil industry and the fossil fuel, but I mean, we can have that because we have been lied to persistently for half a century or more. We can be angry and aggrieved about that, but let's not have that as the dominant discourse. The dominant discourse needs to be, what if we were to see this as a planetary initiation moment, part of an evolution? Let's claim it as that. What would we do with it if we approached it as that? What are we going to have to give up? When we went from being 12 to 15, we gave up a whole lot of things. When we went from being 15 to 25, we gave up a lot more of other things. Every time you take a step forward, you let go of the last step you took.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
And you said it's sort of an ideal situation. Well, maybe it is an idealist perspective, but it's very immediate.
Yeah, it's here now. Yeah.
It's here now, and it connects us back to that 14 billion year process. And if people want to try, there's a growing field in biology that understands that evolution has happened through autopoietic processes. That means processes by which an organism feels good or bad. That's really the binary at play, and moves towards things that feel good and moves away from things that feel bad. As complexity increases, the way we name good and bad broadens. So it then becomes, I feel respected, I feel disrespected, I feel content, I feel discontent, I feel loved, whatever the quality.
Yep.
I'd encourage people to pick a quality. Either it's one that they long for, or it's one that they have strongly right now. And to go and take it on safari and go outside into the world. Or if they can't get out into the world, just look around the room that they're in and see what resonates with that quality and what the information that comes when we take the quality as a lens through which we see the world.
Yeah. Well, Mark, you've just summed up a couple of core tenets of what has this whole year-long program launching. And particularly the question, what if this is actually a global moment of initiation? What's the possibility for us to have this be the ultimate opportunity to reconnect in a profound way with our own inner self, with each other, with Earth, and with soul? So you just wrapped it up and put a bow on it. Thank you very much. And I'm hoping that I can ask you back for what I believe will be some very lively panel discussions about particular threads that are going to be showing up or already showing up in this project. And, it's great. It's been so nourishing for me to be able to have this kind of conversation with you now for a couple of years on a nearly weekly basis. And I just feel so contributed to by your extensive experience, your extensive knowledge, and particularly your heart. I know you to be just an extraordinarily caring person. So thanks so much for coming on and sharing a bit with us.
My pleasure. Have a great day.